And a lot of them are very big farms. They don't a lot of but you can see it's a weird thing. Yeah, it's my favorite.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Kay Stefanik, Assistant Director of the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. I want to welcome you all to our last seminar for this semester for our seminar series, Insights from Next Generation Water Researchers. Today we have two graduate students with us who are going to be presenting on their INRC funded research. So before we begin, I just have two housekeeping items. First, this session is going to be recorded and will be posted online within probably a few days. The second, this is a hybrid meeting, so we have people online and in person. If you are online, you can type your questions into the chat box and I will read those out at the end of the seminar. And if you're in the room, just raise your hand and we'll have time for questions either after our first presenter or at the very end, depending on timing. So for our first presenter, we have Eric Henning. Eric is a PhD student in the Department of Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering at Iowa State University, working on research with Dr. Matt Helmers. And he is going to be presenting on recycling drainage water for irrigation in Iowa.
Yeah, first off, thank you to INRC for the invitation to present to you today and for the funding. And then thank you to the attendees here in person and online. As Kay mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about recycling drainage water for irrigation in Iowa. Okay. Yep, there we go. Okay, starting off, what is drainage water recycling? So the concept of drainage water recycling is really a pretty simple concept. We take the water that we often have in excess early in the growing season in the spring, and we store it in a reservoir, and then we use it later in the growing season when we might need some water for our crops and pump it through an irrigation system. So the design of these systems can be pretty complex, but like I said, really the core concept is pretty simple. Take water when you don't need it, keep it for later when you do need it. So with drainage water recycling, there's a bunch of potential benefits that we can see from these systems. Obviously with crop production, having that ability to irrigate when crops need a little extra water can boost yields. Can also reduce year-to-year yield variability because you have that extra water. There's a different agronomic management options from having an irrigation system. And then also there's water quality benefits. So if you hold your drainage water that's often enriched with nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, and you keep it on the farm, right, going downstream, you're benefiting downstream water quality. And then there's a host of complementary benefits that are potentially realized with drainage water recycling, like flood control, wildlife habitat, and energy production. So we have a pretty simple idea with a lot of potential benefits. Why is it just coming out now? Well, the answer is it's an old idea. People have been looking at drainage water recycling for a long time. I found an extension report from 1951 from Iowa State ag engineers talking about irrigation in Iowa. And while they don't explicitly talk about drainage water recycling, they mention how you can source drainage water from a pond and pump out from that pond. And they asked a lot of the same questions that I've been asking about irrigation in Iowa. Namely, does it pay? How much do you need to make from your irrigation to pay off all the equipment and maintenance costs? Fast forward to the 90s, Dr. Stu Melvin and Dr. Kanwar, they looked at a drainage water recycling site in Ankeny, Iowa. And their takeaways were that, yes, you could find crop yield and water quality benefits from this system, but the economic potential is really kind of limited in a traditional, conventional commodity crop system. And it's probably more likely that it could be used making money with high value crops. Then moving on to the 21st century, there's been researchers who've been looking at field sites, drainage water recycling sites in Ohio, Missouri, Minnesota, and they've all found some pretty significant corn yield benefits on the range of 20 bushels an acre across all those sites. And then there's some decreases in yield variability and some water quality benefits as well. Okay, so we've established that drainage water recycling is good. Why am I talking about it now? Well, some of the reasons why it's kind of re-emerging is recent drought conditions. So maybe last year wasn't so dry, but think back the previous 2 or 3 years, it was pretty dry, and a lot of farmers were starting to think about the ability, wanting to have the ability to irrigate. Additionally, we have the IR nutrient reduction strategy that I think we're all familiar with in this room, and how we're pretty far away from meeting our goals. So anything that we can do to add new practices or increase adoption of nutrient reduction practices, we're going to be interested in. And then also there's different climate and yield, crop yield projections that maybe indicate that maybe our current system of rain-fed agriculture in Iowa isn't going to work into the future. So in Iowa, we have 3 existing drainage water recycling sites that our group is monitoring, and they're all kind of in the central Iowa region. We have one in Calhoun County near Lake City, one in Webster County near the town of Dayton, and then one in Story County near Story City. And so each of these drainage water recycling sites uses a center pivot irrigation system. They all kind of vary a little bit. The Story City site has been around for a little bit longer. We've been monitoring that one for longer. Dayton and Story City both have silty clay loam, poorly drained soils, whereas Lake City has a wadena loam that's well drained. And then another thing that's of note is the different configurations of the reservoirs and how they source their water. It's all a little bit different where they get their water to irrigate with. So far, there's been 2 master's theses published looking at data from these sites. First in 2020, Sam Phillips looked at projecting yield benefits at the Story City site and found between 20 and 30 bushel increase every year, or on average. And then the return on investment kind of was mixed. It was, some years it might be negative, some years it might be positive. Then in 2023, Tyler Meyer looked at water quality aspects of drainage water recycling and found pretty significant nitrogen load reductions in these systems. But the phosphorus reductions were kind of mixed by site. And then just the yields that we've observed while we've been monitoring these sites. In Dayton, there's only been 1 corn year where we monitored, and it was last year and they didn't irrigate, so there's no irrigation benefit. But in Lake City, over the past 2 years, there's been an average of 44 bushels. And in Story City, over the last 7 corn years, it's been an average of 31. So taking all of this into account and looking at my research questions that I'm going to talk about in this presentation, the 2 main things I wanted to answer were, what is the long-term yield benefit that we can expect from irrigation at these existing sites? And then how much irrigation water do we need to supply those yield benefits? And kind of a sub-question of that is, how should we manage irrigation? Because that can affect how much irrigation water you need. To do that, I utilized APSIM, which is the Agricultural Production Systems Simulator. It's a modeling platform that's been well established to simulate Iowa corn production systems. And so how it works is I give APSIM measured local weather data, measurements on the soil profile, and then I plug in all of the agronomic management from these farms, and then it spits out some outputs. And to make sure that those outputs are accurate, I take calibration measurements of crop stage, biomass, leaf area index, water table depth, and soil moisture trends to make sure that the model is working correctly and that I'm making accurate predictions. And so that's kind of the calibration process with APSIM. Once I have the model calibrated for each of my sites, I ran a factorial experiment. So I have 36 total simulations. I have the 3 sites, and then I have every combination of 3 irrigation treatments and 4 water availabilities. So for irrigation treatments, we're talking full irrigation, which we define as 1 inch can be applied every 4 days, so about a 1/4 inch a day. Limited, we say that's 1/2 inch can be applied every 3 days, so about 1/6 of an inch every day. And then a no irrigation treatment. And then for water availability, it's 3 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches, or unlimited. And I'll kind of zip through this, but all these simulations have some things in common. I'm simulating 40 years of weather data from 1985 to 2024. For the agronomic management, I'm doing a continuous corn rotation, 113-day corn hybrid planted with 178 pounds of UAN, nitrogen applied at planting, and then strip tillage in the fall. For the irrigation, I plug in some irrigation rules for the simulation. So when plant available water reaches 50% depletion of the total available water in the root zone, then irrigation is triggered. And so throughout the year, the root zone changes a little bit. In June, it's 3 feet, July it's 3.5 feet, and in August it's 4 feet. And this kind of corresponds to the plant root development and the root zone that you want to manage. I do have another little thing for June. I'm only irrigating if it was an exceptionally dry May. And the reason for that is typically the most important periods to manage for irrigation are in July and August. So I don't really want to use up too much water in June. So it's kind of like an exception. If it's really dry, then we'll go ahead and irrigate in June. And then also to kind of stimulate a farmer who is looking at the weather forecast, if an inch of rain is going to occur the day after irrigation, we cancel the irrigation. So jumping into some of the irrigation yield benefits, if we focus on this plot, so I have yield benefit on the y-axis and then the 40 simulation years on the x-axis. And each site is distinguished by a color, with Lake City being green, Dayton being red, and Story City being blue. And the dashed line is the average over the 40 years. Now, how I'm defining yield benefit is the average yield of all the different irrigated scenarios minus the yield of the non-irrigated scenario for that year in that site. And so a few things that jump out right away. There's a lot of year-to-year variability. So 1 year you might get 75 bushels increase from irrigation, and next year you might get like slight yield penalty of like 5 bushels. And the Lake City site clearly has the highest potential. That's those well-drained soils. I think, that was expected. But those are kind of some of the obvious trends that you can see with that data off the bat. Now, if we kind of take a look at the table and focus in on Lake City, we really have a large yield benefit, about 37 bushels per acre that you can add on average from irrigation. If you go down to the different water availability means, there's a statistically significant difference between the 3, 4, and 6, but not between the 6 and the unlimited. And so water availability does make a difference at Lake City, but whether you have the full or deficit or limited irrigation, it's not going to change your yield. Now, Dayton and Story City, both poorly drained soils, they kind of have a similar story. Generally pretty modest yield improvement from irrigation, but there's some really large yield benefits in dry years. And you can kind of see that by comparing the mean and the median. As for instance, in Dayton, any given year you might expect 2 bushels, but the mean really gets skewed because there's a few occasions where there's like 100 bushel increase due to irrigation. And then for these 2 sites, there's really not much difference between the different water availabilities and the irrigation treatments. At Dayton, you're always going to be kind of around 10 bushels. And at Story City, it's always kind of between that 15 to 20 bushel range. Another way to look at the irrigation yield benefits is to plot them against May through August rain. So those are kind of the 4 critical months of the growing season for precipitation. And in this plot, I have 3 vertical dashed lines, and those represent the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile rain values. So you can kind of think that the 2 middle rectangles are like the kind of normal years, and then on the left, that's like a really dry year, and on the right, that's a really wet year. And so across all sites, you can see pretty consistent yield benefits in the dry years. Like if it's 1 of every 4 years that's dry, you're going to have some yield benefit from irrigation. If it's the 1 in every 4 years that's wet, you're not going to have a yield benefit really regardless of site. Now, I do kind of want to take the opportunity to mention some of these yield penalties. I suspect we'll have to look into this more. That's not really like a wet stress yield penalty, but more of a nitrogen factor. For instance, if you have a dry year and then a wet year, in the unirrigated scenario, there's a lot of residual nitrogen left over because the crop didn't do very well. And so it carries that on into the wet year and has more nitrogen available. That's something I'm gonna have to look into more and suss that out. But I suspect that's not really over irrigation, more of a nitrogen problem. In Lake City, those green points, there's really a pretty consistent yield benefit even in the normal years. But then in Dayton and Story City, it's a little bit more of a mixed bag. Story City has more big yield benefits in normal years, but there's also it's counterbalanced by some pretty modest or even those yield penalties. Now taking a look at irrigation needs. So these box plots show the full versus limited irrigation strategies in terms of irrigation applied in my simulations. And then we have each water availability and each site. And a few things to highlight from these plots. The limited irrigation reduces the total irrigation applied slightly. At the Dayton and Story City, the poorly drained sites, maybe kind of on the order of 1/2 inch to 1 inch annually. And then at Lake City, really, if you have 3 or 4 inches, you're going to use all of it, whether you have limited or full irrigation. But towards the 6 inches and unlimited, there's some reduction from a limited strategy. But when we really think about comparing full and limited irrigation, in more arid regions, you might really want to maximize like yield per water, like a crop per drop is kind of what they call it. But in a drainage water recycling scenario, that might not always be our goal. So for instance, if you have 3 inches of water to irrigate on July 1st, you might not want to put it all on then because you want to save some more for later in the year when you aren't sure if you're going to have the water. But then if it's August 15th and you have 3 inches of water, you might be tempted to use it all and not hold any back, because then you're creating capacity in your reservoir to treat water for water quality benefit. And you don't really have to save water for later in the year. And so you might be tempted to just go with full irrigation. So it depends, within the year, and there's a lot of, it gets pretty complex how we kind of optimize irrigation for these. Another way to look at irrigation needs is an exceedance probability plot. So this plot that I have, it shows irrigation applied on the y-axis and then a probability of exceedance on the x-axis. And how you can think about this is like, say at 80% on the x-axis for the Dayton site in the red, that means there's an 80% chance that you're going to need at least 0 inches of irrigation. And if you move up maybe to say 50 and you follow those red dots, that's okay. There's about a 50% chance we'll need about 3 inches or more of irrigation. And so there's definitely a little bit some discrepancies between the 3 sites. Again, like not surprisingly, Lake City, there's a greater likelihood that you're going to need more irrigation. So in 80% of the years, you're going to need at least 3 inches that can be applied. Whereas at these poorly drained sites, 3 inches, you might only need that half the time, about 50%. And so what does all that mean for irrigation needs? Well, regardless of your soils, if you're in central Iowa, you could probably use 3 inches of irrigation about half the years. And for these poorly drained sites, 3 to 4 inches might be kind of your optimal capacity when you're considering just crop production alone. There could be some additional benefits for the water quality and habitat and stuff like that with additional storage capacity, but the crop yield benefits aren't going to pay for that. And then at our well drained site in Lake City, 6 inches is kind of the upper limit of what you could need. We did not see much yield difference for the unlimited versus the 6 inches. So wrapping it all up, I think some of the conclusions are that yield benefits can vary widely, even within the same region, that your soils really do matter. Even, obviously the well-drained soils are favored for irrigation yield benefit. That wasn't a surprise. But even comparing 2 different silty clay loams, with Dayton being about 10 and Hermanson or at Story City being about 17, that's almost double the yield benefit at the Story City site. And then, kind of back to that plot where I had the dry year, I think it's notable that irrigation could be beneficial about 1 in every 4 years, no matter where you are in central Iowa, or maybe not no matter where you are, but within reason for these sites being represented. And then your reservoir capacity is probably going to range between 3 inches and 6 inches. I don't think there's just one value that we can use for every site. If you have poorly drained soils, you're probably more on 3 inches. If you're well drained, it's more on the 6 inches side. So I think I'm going to zip through these next questions for the sake of time. But the next things I'd like to look into are some robust economic analysis. How close are we to paying off irrigation with crop yield benefit? How do we estimate soil water deficit for irrigation scheduling? How do we balance nitrogen management with irrigation? And then kind of the big question, how do we optimize drainage water recycling for both crop production and water quality benefits? So with that, I'd like to thank Iowa Nutrient Research Center again, and then also thank my collaborators, Matt Helmers and Chris Hay. And I think I can take some questions here while we're switching out.
One question. And then at the very end, we'll take any additional questions.
Great talk. So my question is that you have a chance to figure what's the water use efficiency? I think this is important in your model function. That's the same across the site or?
I have not calculated that, no. But thank you for the suggestion.
Okay, maybe one more question.
There is one online.
There is?
Yeah, yeah. Will there be any modeling done on other irrigation methods, and do you expect those to perform differently than center pit?
So I do not believe, for me, that I have any plans to model different irrigation methods because I'm not monitoring any of these sites at this time, so I can't calibrate a model. Yeah, I think it depends. There's definitely pros and cons to center pivot versus maybe a sub irrigation. And that might depend on, your site conditions. Not every site can handle sub irrigation or is fit for sub irrigation. Center pivot's nice because it's a little bit more versatile. But sub irrigation can be more efficient because you don't lose as much to evaporation with the sprinklers. So it's yeah, there's trade-offs.
Thank you. So we're going to transition to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Esteban Gonzalez. He is a PhD student in the Department of Plant Pathology, Entomology, and Microbiology at Iowa State University. He is working on research with Dr. Allison Robertson. And today he is going to be presenting on studying the effect of winter cereal rye variety on the growth and yield of corn.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Esteban Gonzalez. As she mentioned, I'm a master's and PhD student in plant pathology. And I will talk to you about my research project called studying the effect of winter cereal rye variety on the growth and yield of corn. So the outline for my presentation, I will give you an introduction about why do we study cover crops and how seedling diseases are related to. And also I will talk about some hypotheses that we have about the background of my research. And then I will talk about my field trials and preliminary results that we got from last year, 2024. And then I will talk about a little bit about nutrient limitation and my future work and how this research have been helping me in my professional development. Well, as we know, intensive production of annual crops affects soil health. So the continuously use of soil every year conduces to erosion and the over-application of fertilizers and conduces to acidification, loss of biodiversity, and also loss of organic matter. And this can lead to soil problems. So cover crops are an alternative agricultural practice that are used to mitigate these negative effects of intensive agriculture. And cereal rye is the most used cover crop in the Midwest because it survives the winter and grows at really low temperatures, and also provides reduced nitrogen leaching and runoff to the rivers and water bodies. And it also provides numerous environmental benefits like increase of organic matter and also improve the nutrient cycle. However, yield losses have been reported after cereal rye cover crop with a variable range of 4 to 27%, which also I think explain why the cover crop adoption in the Midwest is really low. It's almost the 72% of the total acres. And I think that's also why farmers are hesitant to adopt this practice in their fields. Some of the factors that have been attributed to this yield loss are allelopathy, high carbon nitrogen ratio of cereal rye, nutrient limitation, and seedling disease. So the main goal for this research is to improve our understanding of the underlying factors affecting corn yields after a cereal rye cover crop. So how seedling disease related to this? And we have the green bridge. We call the green bridge as a living host that offers pathogens an escape from the highly competitive environment of decomposing plant residues in soil. The spring-terminated cover crops provide live root refuge for that potentially shield pathogens. Some previous research demonstrates that higher densities of pythium, which is a pathogen in the roots of corn seedlings, have been found in winter cereal rye compared to those following winter fallow. And also Pythium and Fusarium were more frequently found in corn seedlings after a cereal rye cover crop. With that, we have the statement that cereal rye cover crops provide a green bridge or living host for pathogens over winter that then can infect corn seedlings in spring. So based on this, we have different hypotheses related to this green bridge. First is the allelopathic hypothesis. The cerebride allelopathy is linked to the production of benzoxaxinoids. These benzoxaxinoids are secondary metabolites produced by cereal rye roots. So we can see we have DIMBOA and EMBOA that are two benzoxaxinoids produced by cereal rye. And these benzoxaxinoids have been found to inhibit the growth of various small grains and other plant species, and this includes corn. We know that different varieties of cereal rye produce different amounts of benzoxaxinoids. So with that, we have the hypothesis that allelopathy may contribute to reduce vigor, increase disease severity, and lower yield of corn. Also, I forgot to mention that this allelopathic effect of cereal rye is one of the reasons why cereal rye is planted as a cover crop, because it is successful in weed control. Then we have the herbicide effect hypothesis. Herbicide application is the most popular method used to terminate a cover crop in Iowa, and glyphosate is the most common herbicide used because it provides the most consistent termination. But glyphosate have been found increasing severity and re-emergence of several crop diseases. So that's why we hypothesize that as glyphosate compromises the plant defense system, plants may be more susceptible to soil-borne pathogens, including Pythium and Fusarium species. So we have the everything is everywhere all at once hypothesis that shows that there's not only one factor affecting corn yield after a cereal rye cover crop. We have different factors that can be negatively related to, and for example, allelopathy, glyphosate effectiveness, delayed termination, the green bridge hypothesis, the nitrogen immobilization in cereal rye residues. So all of these can conduce to negative effects in growth and yields of corn. So based on this, we have the objective to compare the effect of cereal rye cultivar on seedling disease populations, also populations of Pythium, soil nitrogen and sulfur dynamics, concentrations of benzoxaxinoids compounds in soil, and growth and yield of corn. This based on the hypothesis that characteristics of cereal rye cultivar, like biomass and allelochemical production, will affect the biological value of cover crops as a conservation practice. As second objective, we want to compare the effect of herbicide used to terminate cereal rye on cereal rye regrowth, corn seedling disease, population of Pythium, and corn yield. Based on the hypothesis that applications of glyphosate used to terminate the cereal rye promote the buildup of corn seedling pathogens that result in a green bridge between cereal rye and corn. So I will show you how we set up our field trials. So split plot field trials, we're established with 1 million seeds per acre of 4 varieties of cereal rye that are Serafino, Elbum, Arusuk, and Raimin, and also a control with no cereal rye. These varieties were planted after soybean harvest in a random block design for 6 repetitions. Then prior corn termination, we collect samples for cereal rye shoots to measure biomass and also carbon-nitrogen ratio for each variety. And then the cereal rye is terminated with glyphosate or paraquat prior to corn planting in the spring. Then corn is planted 3 days after termination, and we collect soil samples to measure Pythium populations. And 5 days after corn planting, we also take soil samples to measure the concentration of allelochemicals from each variety. Then corn seedlings are evaluated at growth stage B3, and a number of barren plants are evaluated at growth stage R5 And at the end of the growing season, we collect, we harvest the corn to obtain yields. So I will show you my preliminary results from 2024. First, we found that Elbon, the variety Elbon, produces the greatest biomass of all varieties. And also we found that there's no significant differences among the other varieties, Serafino, Arusuk, and Rhyming. In the carbon nitrogen ratio of cereal rye varieties, we found that there are no significant differences among each variety. We have some reasons why we think we didn't have any differences among these varieties. Then the effect of variety on root rot severity, we found that there are no significant differences among varieties, but there are significant differences with the control, which was very healthy compared to the corn planted in the cereal rye plots. Then for the herbicide on root rot severity effect, we found that glyphosate affects more the root rot severity than paraquat. And we also did an interaction between variety and herbicide to see if there are any difference in these interactions. And we found that the interaction between Serafino and paraquat combined show the higher percentage of root rot severity compared to the control and the other treatments. And finally, we also count the number of barren plants per each treatment. And we found that the rhyming plots show the most number of barren plants, and the control show the less number of barren plants. We can see here in the right that the yield showed a little bit like a tendency compared with the number of barren plants, where we found that the control had the greatest yield compared to the cereal rye treatments. And also there are no significant differences among cereal rye varieties, but there's a significant difference with the control. Also, we can see that the yield is not the worst for the cereal rye treatments, but it means like if we compare with the control, we can see there are significant differences that can, like, there's a yield reduction, and that is translated to money losses. Well, as implications from these results, this suggests that first, cereal rye varieties may affect corn seedling disease development, and glyphosate may lead to more severe corn seedling disease. We also found that more severe seedling disease can be associated with greater yield loss, and data from these studies will inform best management and strategies for farmers and producers, specifically the choice of cereal rye variety planted before corn in order to mitigate these yield loss. I will talk you about this hypothesis, the nutrient limitation hypothesis. Some research found that lack of available soil nitrogen for corn is due to nitrogen immobilization during the composition of cereal rye residues. And as we can see in this picture, plants grown in nitrogen-limited conditions are less vigorous and more susceptible to pathogens. We see the plants planted in the cereal rye plots that are those in the left are less vigorous than those planted in the no cereal rye plots. So nitrogen stress reduced plant stem and a slower growth with cereal rye cover crop has been shown in these results. So also I found that there are not research about sulfur immobilization. So that's why we will study the effect of sulfur immobilization as well. So as future work, I will study the role of nitrogen and sulfur. For that, we will do growth chamber experiment where we will test the effect of nitrogen, sulfur, nitrogen plus sulfur, then cedarite leachates, and all of them combined, and not control treatment with none of them. And also, I sent the samples for benzosaxinoids measurements to the metabolomics lab, and we are waiting for results to see if there are any differences among the concentration of each oleochemical. So how this research have been helping me in my professional development, in my goal to become a plant pathologist, field extensionist, and outreach. So I had the opportunity to attend different meetings. Last year, I went to the APS North Central Division where I presented my first poster. And as an international student, this gave me the opportunity to improve my my communication skills and also to establish network with people related to my expertise area. And this was very, very helpful for me in my goal to become a plant pathologist field extensionist. So with that, I'm gonna thank the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, as well the USDA and NIPA, and this has number. And also my lab team, Dr. Alison Robertson, who's present here with us, and also Clarissa Smith, who have been helping me with molecular stuff, and John Shriver, my field manager, who set up my field trials, and Dr. Rachel Mattinson, who's also working with cedar rye cover crop. And she have been really helpful to me in understanding how this cover crop system works. And also Lobson, who is another grad student in my lab, who has been helping me to collect samples in the field. So that's all I have for today. If you have any question, I'll be more than happy to answer.
A question on the killing of the cereal rye. Well, I guess I have two questions. Killing of the cereal rye, you did that 3 days after, or what I should say is you planted the corn 3 days after cereal rye termination.
Yeah.
Is that what would be recommended for a farm?
No, no for a farmer. We recommend to plant the corn around 14 days after cedar rye termination, but we need to have disease to see the effect of each variety.
But then you were trying to kind of stress that the potential
Exactly.
corn yield.
Wasn't purpose, yeah, to have this seedling disease.
And maybe this is maybe not a fair question necessarily for you, but maybe more for those thinking about cover crops, doing cover crop work. It seems like the species of cover crop made a difference, but I think there's still a lot that farmers just buy variety not stated. So
Yeah.
maybe this work can help lead to more work on what we grow and what we have available for seeding. So I guess that was not a question, that was a comment to my cover crop colleagues here.
So I just feel very curious about your future work. You added the looking about the ligand dynamics. I'm worried. Do you expect that when you add more ligand will kind of offset those negative impacts by those pathogens?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do you kind of expect those negative yield loss impact will be kind of offset by when you add more nitrogen?
Yeah, we expect to have a less effect on yield reduction if we add nitrogen rate, a higher nitrogen rate at the beginning, but that's not the main idea of having cover crops, because we want to improve the nitrogen cycling and in order not to add more fertilizer to our fields.
So that was quite a dramatic picture drastic picture, the difference between the corn with the cover crop and not. So is that more a result of mobilization or disease?
That's what we hypothesize,
Or,
that it's more due to nitrogen immobilization by the cereal ripe residues. But we are not sure. That's why we are investigating this.
And that's a good point. If they're less vigorous and more susceptible to pathogens, even if that nitrogen becomes available, you may have already negatively impacted that corn crop by that point.
As you think about your different rye varieties and how much cover crop I want to grow, there's a trial right by Liebert right now where they're actually growing rye, and there's a huge amount of difference when I look at them, like how green they are, how tall they are. You see a lot of difference in yields, and like, what am I shooting for? And then a further rye question for any rye experts. Do all ryes like take off at the same stage, or is some going to start growing bigger earlier? Like, what are we trying to do?
They might, okay, I'm going.
What was your question? Sorry.
Great question. So was there a lot of difference in just biomass, rye biomass?
Mhm.
And then thinking as a farmer, I feel like I don't want too much biomass. It's going to cause more tie-up, essentially. Did you have a feel for like, this one grows enough that I'm happy, but not so it won't get away from me. I'll have time to spray in the spring. Because that's what I really want.
Well, I think we are studying these for varieties, but we don't see any difference among them. But we know that some of them grows more than others, and I think the reason why we didn't see any difference among varieties was because last year we had a lot of rain. We have to delay termination, so we couldn't see clearly the differences among the varieties. But this year, I went to the field. We didn't have that much rain. We terminated the rye on time. And I saw that there are some that we're already in the last growth stage, and other ones we're like shorter and not developed. So yeah, I would recommend to plant the variety that grows less in order to have the benefits, but like not to have the negative effects of having a lot of biomass. Or yeah.
With our last few minutes, we're going to open up the floor to questions for both of our speakers. And we did get another question come in for Eric. Is there any benefit in wet years if ponded areas drain faster when filling the reservoir? Okay, so in wet years, ponded areas in the field, will you see them draining faster when you're kind of filling up the reservoir?
Oh, I don't think we looked into that. I think the drainage, whether you have the reservoir or not, should be the same. So I wouldn't expect any difference.
And it sounds like maybe they're getting it. So there's no infield drainage tile when you add in drainage water.
Yeah, not at these sites.
So Eric, you mentioned that you'd only irrigate in May if we got down below about
June.
June.
Yeah.
At 50%.
If May was less than 3.5 inches of rain, so that's like the 25 percentile.
25%.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you look at differences with the control that you did get in irrigation at that early stage compared to the control that you had no irrigation? And if there was no yield impact?
So you're asking like, if I had the junior irrigation or if I didn't have junior irrigation?
Yeah.
I did not include that in this work. Yeah. Generally, I think the max junior irrigation was like 1 or 2 inches. There was very rarely where you had to irrigate a lot.
So sometimes that early, like it's on the other side, that early stage can
Yeah, kind of the idea was like, well, we want to irrigate during reproductive stages, but we got to get to the reproductive stages. So if it's really dry, maybe we need to keep the crop going to get there.
Right.
I have 2 questions for you.
Oh, fine.
Oh, all right.
You can go ahead. I have 2 for Eric and 1 for you. For Eric, how much nitrogen is being recycled, right? So you're capturing a lot in the spring, but I don't think your model is putting it back on
Yeah.
irrigation.
So yeah, I did not include the nitrogen, from the reservoir as like a nitrogen credit. Tyler Meyer, who did the water quality work, I think he was saying it's like a couple pounds per acre. So I ended up just kind of ignoring it. Yeah, it's like environmentally, it's probably impactful, but to recycle on the crop, it's not that much fertilizer value.
Interesting. I was hoping there would be more.
Yeah.
I guess the next question is, how much does these irrigation events reduce yield variability? Because
Yeah.
that could allow farmers to be more risk advantageous with other conservation practices.
Yeah, that's a really good point and something I need to look at. Because there has, in one of those papers I mentioned earlier, I think they found 28% reduction in yield variability. But yeah, that's for sure a big factor, especially as you're thinking about like marketing. If even in a dry year, you can get X yield, that's definitely a big plus.
And for society, it could even benefit us from a crop insurance standpoint. If we know there's more yield stability with these types of systems, could you get a reduction in your crop insurance payment? I don't know, but.
Oh, that's a great point too.
Yeah.
And then finally for Dan, and I'll stop talking. What's your target biomass for cover crops? And if a farmer hits it, they just spray that.
I don't know that I have one, but I think one of the things that people tend to say is see bigger yield drags cover crop gets away. Now, I'm stuffing your slide on. I don't know if it's because of water, nitrogen, a mobilization from uptake of the cover crop, or I just have too much for disease control. But I do feel like when your cover crop gets big, bad things tend to happen to you. So I don't know. We don't know enough to balance. Matt has some data that shows if you grow more cover crops, you tend to get a better job
for nitrate reduction. And if you grow more cover crop, you have more weed suppression. But you got to grow a lot of cover crop to get the weed suppression.
Yeah, Megan's with like 3 tons an acre of cover crop.
Right.
I think I want to grow 1 to 2 tons. I don't want to get people out of that. I don't know that I can.
So Mitch, you're asking good questions that you should come to the INRC researcher roundtable open house next Thursday. Because you can talk about some of these things too.
Sure, what time?
9:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
Send me an email, Mitch.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Give you that.
You guys connect that.
Thanks.
And I have kind of a related question that if glyphosate airport causes ceiling disease, or is linked to it, seriously, even though suppression by creeper or something may not cause as rate of suppression, unbalanced, which is better. I mean, that's a whole separate research project to us, right? But since you brought that in, that was something that seemed new information that I have never heard about.
The problem with the crimper is that you have to wait until the rice starts flowering to crimper it and kill it. And while you can do that in soybean, then you're planting your corn too late, then you run into other different potential. Yeah. So.
No, I'm going to let my question go. I'll just ask Eric.
Okay.
We are a little over time. not by much, but let's thank our speakers again. And then this recording will be posted on the INRC website, and you can find the recordings for all of our previous seminars on the website as well.